After what seemed like constant and premeditated rejection from every musician in our school, I was the only one who had had any official lessons, and it wasn't even for the instrument I was playing. How could he possibly cope? And there we were, looking out at maybe 1,000 people. 1, 2, 3. Every musician remembers their first band, their first recording, their first gig. My first band was called Refuge of 1,000 Souls, and this is the story of our first gig. Yes, seriously, we were called Refuge of 1,000 Souls. I didn't say it was a good name. We were a weird 60s psychedelic-inspired indie three-piece, and lasted probably about 2 years on and off. The band was first formed when a fellow guitarist and I sat next to each other in GCSE music. More accurately, we sat next to each other by pure chance. Had the teacher chosen to seat the class based on their last name instead of whatever method they had chosen, we could have been sat miles apart, and history could have gone a complete different direction. But I digress. We bonded over a love of heavy metal and classic prog rock, and introduced each other to a plethora of different acts. If it weren't for him, I might never have discovered Metallica, King Crimson or Opeth. In return, I showed him Camel, Focus and Hawkwind. For 2 years we were trying to form a functioning rock group, and no one cared to join. The other student bands were doing Red Hot Chili Peppers and Blink-182 covers. No one seemed interested in joining two metalheads wanting to play original psychedelic rock. We performed at a school talent show to a pre-recorded drum track, and the whole affair was so poorly done on the part of the school that I vowed to never perform to a backing track outside of amateur karaoke ever again. More on that story in another video, so make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so that you catch it when it comes out. Finally, after what seemed like constant and premeditated rejection from every musician in our school, we found someone. His name was Steve, and I found him in the place you would naturally expect to find aspiring rock musicians. Sat next to me in maths class. Until he met me, he only listened to The Darkness and the Wurzels, something that equated to an eclectic, if minimal, Spotify playlist. There was a catch. Steve didn't play an instrument yet. Like at all. I don't think even the recorder. A friend of his was selling an old bass guitar, so my guitarist and I took it upon ourselves to teach Steve bass. For free, no less. As long as he was to be in our band. Sounded like a fair deal, and with that, we now had a bass player who didn't know bass. My dad has a habit of telling me that nobody remembers the bass player in a rock band anyway, and I said that to a bass player once, and they got very upset.
Can't remember who it was though.
Steve's first lesson was awful. My guitarist owned a normal right-handed bass, but for reasons known only to him, he decided to give the right-hand dominant Steve his first bass guitar lesson on a left-handed six-string electric. Okay, whatever. Someone teaching from me later, and Steve could play the staple riffs every four-string fret lord should know. Seven Nation Army, Smoke on the Water, and the root notes to the chord progression of Knocking on Heaven's Door. Steve's cousin, who shall be known for obvious reasons as Ginge, had started taking drum lessons, and owned a rickety old drum kit that was set up in his parents' garage. When I say that he had started taking drum lessons, we literally mean that his first drum lesson was pretty much the day before what was officially our first band practice. Now we also had a drummer who didn't know drums. To this day, these early band practices are some of my fondest memories of music. Not because it was a high musical standard, we were largely terrible for a long time. They were fun. They were character building, and they were hilariously held together by tape. Literally, there are pictures of me singing into a broken microphone which was held onto a stepladder by reels of duct tape. I'll do that in another video as well. So there we were, 4 lads in a literal garage band, our equipment held together by tape. 2 of whom were self-taught on guitar, 1 of whom was being taught bass by the 2 self-taught guitarists, and 1 drummer, who first picked up the sticks only days prior. This was when it dawned on me. I was the only one who had had any official lessons in this band, and it wasn't even for the instrument I was playing. I'm classically trained in violin, not guitar and vocals. This wasn't a problem, but it was a strange realisation. I was proud of what we were doing, being unencumbered by the cynicism and elitism that usually dogs so-called professional musicians. We could all hope to be so chill and happy in our lives. If you have one takeaway from this story, make it this. Please enjoy music, be that listening, playing or writing. If you want music done the right way, I have no time for you. Back to the story. All appeared well, but the tide was set to turn for 1,000 souls. Our guitarist was philandering with a second band. A screamo band. Now, musicians can play for more than one band, that's fine. In fact, drummers are about as monogamous as an elephant's seal. But when this is your first band, it hits differently. Strangely enough, I was offered a position in that screamo band first and turned it down. Wild Wild Southwest Screamo, anyone? We thought nothing of it, except for the fact that Refuge of 1,000 Souls had 2 gigs booked over 2 days, the yearly school talent show and the local beer festival. The Screamo band was also booked for the talent show. My guitarist was set to perform 3 times in 24 hours. How could he possibly cope? Well, it turns out he didn't. He quit our band. Not the month before, not the week before, not the time when he found out that both bands he was in were playing the same event. He quit literally the day before the show. What were we going to do? This was a blessing in disguise, as a matter of fact. By this time, we'd been a band for a few months and had 3 originals and a couple of covers. We technically had more songs in the process of being written, but we abandoned them immediately after our guitarist left, as we had realised he was trying to incorporate screamo elements into our music, which, for us, really wasn't appropriate. I wouldn't have said there was any bad blood between us. We were just in completely different places musically. We wanted to write fun, psychedelic, bluesy pieces about drinking too much. He wanted to be in a band that screamed about murdering their girlfriends after she cheated on them to the sound of blast beats and downtuned guitars. Nothing wrong with that, just not what we were. Thousand Souls' first gig went wonderfully. This year, the talent show was arranged like a music festival, so people were milling around the different stalls and shows that were taking place. But the focal point was the music stage, showcasing the various school bands and singers. At one time, there was a good 500 people watching us. We performed our originals to our peers and their families to the sound of very subtle, polite applause. Less than 24 hours later, we took to the stage at the local beer fest, which was set a full West Country mile from the site of our inaugural live show. Our reach was incredible. Now, this festival was the main highlight of the year for our small West Country town, so we saw the school talent show as a warm-up to the big one. Gig number 2 rolled around, we arrived at the front gate, unloaded our gear, got on stage, and there we were, looking out at maybe 1,000 people. This was it. This was our Woodstock. This was our Glastonbury. For a small, very amateur band of probably not old enough to legally drink year-olds, to say they had played the 2 main stages in their town in 2 days was a big deal. As far as I could see, we were the only act to do this at this time as well. I cannot downplay how important these first 2 shows were for us. I have since played that same beer festival several more times, both in Thousand Souls and in other acts. It has always been amazing. But our most memorable, or perhaps surreal gig, was at a completely different festival, miles from our home. A festival of which there is no record of having ever existed. And you can find that story by clicking here.